All right, so we're starting on slide 14 and the hypothalamus. So I did want to back up for just a second to remind you about what the last slide we covered on, Wednesday. So we talked about the specific, the functions or what mammillary bodies are involved with, olfactory reflexes, emotional responses to odors. I didn't give you guys an example. I grew up mostly in the Central Valley of California, and there's a lot of agriculture, there's a lot of food processing that occurs there. And so I went to Modesto Adventist Academy, and it's right along this major road where trucks go carrying produce back and forth, and there's a lot of processing plants. So when we would go outside for recess, we could smell, for example, the tomatoes cooking for the pasta sauce cans. Or some days it would smell like maple syrup. So it was weird. So sometimes when I smell like just the right kind of tomato smell, it reminds me of being out on the playground playing kickball with my classmates, because that happened so often when we were outside playing. Or there was this plant on the way driving to school, because we lived 20 minutes away, that we didn't know for years what they processed in that plant, but every time we drove by, it smelled like French fries. And so we liked it. It was like, oh, it smells like French fries. Until the day we found out what they were processing. It was I don't know how to describe this or the best term, but this is where, like a rennet, like where they're processing dead cattle and getting, the fat, all that fun stuff. So it was not like let's butcher the cattle kind of thing. This is where they take the dead cattle from the dairies and then take their fat and process it, or take the hooves and process it for, glue and that kind of stuff. So the smell that we thought smelled good French fries actually wasn't. So sometimes when I smell just that exact kind of French fry smell, takes me back to that plant we always pass by on the way to school every day. So initially the emotions were good emotions, and then they turned to, once we figured out what they were actually doing in that plant. Yes, the Central Valley is a cornucopia of awesome experiences. A few of you are from that region, maybe. Maybe it's my other class. So we had a student from Bakersfield. Where's Tabitha? Oh, she's in the afternoon class. She's from Bakersfield. She would know what I was talking about. Okay, hypothalamus. We know hypothalamus is below the thalamus. It's connected to our pituitary gland via that little tiny stalk, the infundibulum. So we're looking at the functions of the hypothalamus, and you definitely need to know this because the hypothalamus, as a comparison, is kind of like the president of your body. Or maybe not the president, maybe the ultimate control, okay? It oversees everything that's going on. It helps control processes that are occurring. So it has kind of like the final say, or maybe it's like the Senate, I don't know. The kind of like the final say of what's going on with your body. And why is this chair so low? People must have a high torso. Okay, never mind. So 8 functions. Number 1, providing subconscious control of skeletal muscle. So yeah, there are times when we aren't actually paying attention to our bodily movements, and so skeletal muscle, we can have bodily movements that occur without our conscious effort. So our skeletal muscles. Can you think of any examples where without your conscious effort you have bodily skeletal movement? You're not putting it in. So I see swallowing, maybe that's smooth muscle. What about reflexes? We spent a lot of time talking about reflexes. And so the hypothalamus can have, because with the reflex you have information going right back out, but then information going up as well, up to the central nervous system. And so it can modify the signal or the response that you have. Okay, controls autonomic function. Thank you, sir. Coordinates activities of nervous and endocrine system. And so we'll be talking about that mostly when we get into the endocrine system chapter, which is coming up. Does secrete a lot of hormones and also what we call releasing hormones. So again, that's kind of moving into the endocrine chapter. So for example, a couple of are listed. Antidiuretic hormone. This hormone, you don't need to know what nucleus it came from, okay? But you should know the name of the hormone. This is our abbreviation. And the antidiuretic hormone, basically, okay, so if you're like me and you drink a caffeinated beverage or two this morning, it's a diuretic, which means that essentially it causes you to lose more fluid than you have taken in. So it causes overall fluid loss in your body, unless you have very well adapted to it like I have, if you've been doing it for years and years and years. So like caffeine is a diuretic. Antidiuretic hormone works to counteract that effect, works to counteract that extra loss of fluid. And it can do it in many ways, and so the specifics of that we will cover in the endocrine system. But yes, this is a quick comparison. So like 1 cup of coffee, we could say, you know, if your body's not adapted, you should probably drink 2 cups of water to counteract the diuretic effects. Okay? What are the effects of what? Of the caffeine? What happens? Well, we know caffeine helps you alert your brain, but I don't know the exact cascade of effects that leads you to lose more fluid, but it does. But we have a way to counteract that. So whenever you know that you're having a diuretic beverage, like caffeine, it's important to pay attention to the fact that you should probably try to counteract that extra water loss by drinking more water. A more pronounced effect, and I'm sure none of you know what I'm talking about, is if you drink 1 alcoholic beverage, which alcohol is a very strong diuretic, by the way, basically you would need to drink 4 cups of water to counteract that. It's a very strong diuretic. And anybody born prior to like the late 90s? A few? Well, okay. Any of you born before, let's say, the late 1990s? Okay. Does anybody know about Chumbawamba? Chumbawamba. See? Oh. Okay. It's a song you may or may not want to look up, but the song is a great example of the diuretic effects of alcohol. Okay? So I would not, don't go experimenting to the diuretic effects. Just trust me on this, or go look it up on YouTube, Chumbawamba. Right? They were awesome in the 90s, really great song. I think they were a one-hit wonder, but it was very catchy. All right, I'll move on. So diuretic, losing water, we counteract that. And so, for example, some people are given medications that are considered diuretics to help, and that will help them lose fluid. For example, if they have problems with edema, bodily, swelling, or retaining too much fluid in the body, they'll be given medication that are considered diuretics to help them lose that extra fluid. So that they're healthier, less swelling. Oxytocin is another hormone, that's secreted from the hypothalamus. You don't need to know the nucleus from which it comes from. Abbreviation usually that I use is OXT. Usually I spell that one out. It's not a short hormone. It's not a long hormone name. And we'll talk about the functions of that later. The 5th function of the hypothalamus, produces emotion and behavioral drives. Okay, so I'm still looking forward to talking about the limbic system, because that's where a lot of the emotion and behavioral kind of aspects come. But part of the hypothalamus is right there next to the limbic system, so you're going to have an emotional component with the hypothalamus. So for example, feeding center and thirst center. So this, for example, I'm going to go to thirst first because we were kind of talking about that a bit. So for example, if you drink too much of coffee, diuretic, actually what I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling thirsty. That is an effect of the antidiuretic hormone. One of the effects of that hormone is to make you feel thirsty, to ideally go and ingest water to make up for the fact that you are probably getting dehydrated, but instead I sit here and drink my coffee. Not a healthy choice, okay? Also, the feeding center, so where hunger is triggered, and then you get the hunger pains and the growling and stuff, and in fact, just yesterday, my stomach was really growling, and my dog was so confused, because he could hear it, and he was like, what's going on? What's going on? This was some weird sounds. Okay, also coordinating voluntary actions, so voluntary skeletal muscle actions, for example, and autonomic functions. So, again, just overarching thing to remember about the hypothalamus is it's essentially monitoring and has its hand in everything that goes on in your body. Okay? It's involved with it all. Regulating body temperature. What's the average normal body temperature? Yeah, it's 98.6. Some people are naturally lower. Some people are naturally higher. For me, naturally lower, which is why I'm wearing my winter coat in here at the moment. Some of you, like my son, is just naturally higher. He's always 99 point something. He just runs high metabolism, I don't know. So everyone's just a little bit different. When you average all those, we get the 98.6. So if you don't fit that exactly, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're sick. Just kind of, if you start to notice a trend in your own body, it's good to know where your set point is. Again, you don't need to know about the nucleus or the region of the hypothalamus. We're just going to stick with hypothalamus. And then also has a role in circadian rhythms. Now, this is different than the regulating the biological clock and the melatonin, which we get from the pineal gland, but the hypothalamus is also involved with this. Okay, so we have several structures within our brain that help with our day-night cycle, our circadian rhythms, our wakefulness, the feeling of tiredness, for example. So we have several structures that work together for that. And again, don't worry about the nucleus. Okay, limbic system. I do enjoy the limbic system. Okay, you find the limbic system within the cerebrum, and we'll have a picture in just a moment, and part of the diencephalon. And so, remember, if we back up, the diencephalon includes, let's see, I hope I'm not going to say this wrong, our hypothalamus, our thalamus, our subthalamus, and our epithalamus. Yeah, okay. So there's, as remember from a previous slide, hypothalamus, there is some emotional processing that occurs, and that's because there's a portion that's involved with the limbic system. So several things or functions that are part of the limbic system. Basic survival functions, okay? Like, so it says memory is an important one. Reproduction, so for example, this does have an influence on sex drive, sexual behavior, sexual desire, okay? Nutrition, we already know, well, the hypothalamus does, it's the center for hunger and thirst, and so it makes sense because the limbic system is part of the hypothalamic region that it would play a role in getting enough food and the right nutrition. So for example, I'm not going to use humans as an example, I'll use, I think I accidentally, hope I didn't screw this up. What did I do? Okay. I hope it's still recording. Please say. Does it say? Okay, I see the little button up there. Okay. Also, emotions. Okay, and so this is the real part of the brain where emotions are being processed. So you're including emotions and memory and reproductive type behaviors and drives and other survival functions. And so this is a very interesting part of the brain. And so there's several components to the limbic system. One is called the amyloidoid body. Try to say that one fast. I'm slightly biased because, it has my name. There's no meaning there. And then we have what's called the limbic lobe of the cerebral hemisphere, and we'll see the picture on the next slide. It includes these 4 regions. And the hippocampus, it's Friday, I can't talk today. The hippocampus is more of a well-known portion of the limbic system. So let's move to our next slide, and here we go. So just for reference, so this is looking at a mid-sagittal section of the brain. So you've seen this when we did the sheep brain. Here's our corpus callosum, this nice band of white matter that's connecting the right and left sides of the brain. And then this green region surrounding it is part of the limbic system. And then within that, we have several regions of gray matter. So one is the hippocampus. And so the hippocampus is shown in pink right here. And notice how it wraps all the way around above the corpus callosum and back. We have the amyloidoid body, which is very close to our hypothalamus. So it's this region, and notice it does wrap around as well. And then we have what's called the fornix. And I just wanted to show you this. So the fornix is tracts of white matter, and notice how it connects these different nuclei together. So they have the connections between these different little regions. Okay, so the limbic system kind of wraps around our thalamus, our hypothalamus. And so there is, and as you notice, let's see. Here is where the infundibulum should be. Okay, and then I think that's where it should be. That's what it looks like. Yes, this is where the infundibulum should be, and then you'd have your pituitary gland hanging off of that. So there is definitely an overlap between your hypothalamus and the limbic system. So a little bit more about the limbic system. So the fornix, as I just showed you previously, is those tracts of white matter that help connect specifically the hippocampus with the hypothalamus. So backing up real quick, looking at the fornix, I love how I can erase this. So looking at the fornix, so it's saying it's connecting our hippocampus with what other structure? Look, hippocampus with the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is going to be right in this region here. So hippocampus is here, so here's our fornix traveling up and around, and there's those tracts of white matter that connect to the hypothalamus, the mammillary body. So it connects multiple regions, but specifically to the hypothalamus. So that's, again, why we have that emotional connection with the hypothalamus. Okay, anterior nucleus of the thalamus, let's see. We're going to just skip that part for you. Reticular formation. Again, what is this, number 4 or number 5? I don't know how many times we've talked about this. But the reticular formation is there. We'll have to go back and look at the picture. And so this, in this region, is important in emotions. So emotions like, you see there, rage, fear, pain, sexual arousal, pleasure. These are considered more of those survival type functions or base type behaviors. Okay? So let's go back and see if they even show the reticular. It doesn't show the reticular formation in this picture, but it is a part of the limbic system. So we know it's this long, skinny nuclei that extends up all the way from the medulla oblongata up at least into a small portion of the limbic system. Okay, so here's showing you the fornix again. Okay, we're going to move to the cerebellum. Cerebellum, I like this structure. I love dissecting it, seeing that neat arbor vitae. You guys remember the arbor vitae? Yeah. So before we talk about the arbor vitae, our cerebellum is attached, if you remember, kind of imagine the brain we dissected, to the posterior portion of the brainstem, right at the base, or at the inferior portion of the cerebrum. So it sits right behind the brain. Cerebellum basically means little brain. So little brain is sitting behind the big brain. So some functions, cerebellar peduncles, so those are going to be fiber tracts that are communicating with the brain. So these are connections, white matter, between the cerebellum and the brain. So you do have those. So just like the cerebrum, the cortex is made of gray matter, and inside is the white matter. And it's mostly neuron or fiber tracts connecting different regions together. But if you remember what the arbor vitae looks like, it looks like the tree, that white matter with the little gray matter surrounding it, but those are actually fiber tracts connecting different regions together. And so that gray matter, the cortex, the outer surface is heavily folded, just like we see in the cerebral cortex, but it's just on a smaller scale. So when you look at that, those little folds, we call those folia, which kind of refers to leaves, which is consistent with the name for the structure of arbor vitae. And so arbor vitae is the whole structure, and then we have those little folds, and we'll call those are called the folia. Okay? And yes, so we need to remember the white matter within the cerebellum is called the arbor vitae. And just as a reminder, what does arbor vitae mean? Tree of life. Too bad it's not the real one. How many of you are looking forward to heaven? Yeah, I could just, as long as my pets come with me, by the way, personal belief here, you don't have to go with it. I do believe that they will be there. They didn't make a conscious choice to sin, did they? They kind of seem like collateral damage to the sinful world. That's just my opinion. You don't have to agree. If you want to have a debate about it sometime, I'll be super happy to talk to you about it. Love to hear other people's opinions. Are you laughing at me over there? Yes, he is. It's okay. It's part of the job. Okay, here is an important fact for you, other than talking about heaven and pets. So, you know that movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven? So do all cats. Just saying. And horses. Okay, Purkinje cells. This is definitely something you're going to need to remember. Purkinje cells are only found in the cerebellum, and they are the largest neurons in the central nervous system. They're uber big. Okay, so trying to represent them here in this illustration. So notice all those dendrites right here. And there's the cell body, and then you have your axon traveling down. These are really large. So the largest ones only found in the cerebellum, and they are called Purkinje cells. Definitely a fact I would ask you. Okay. More on the cerebellum, certain structures. Let's see here. There is what we call the flocculonodular node. And if we just think big picture, cerebellum is involved with coordination, coordinating bodily movements, etc. When we look at the function of the flocculonodular node, what a word. Balance and eye movements. So helping you with your balance, so you're not wobbling all over the place when you're walking around, and helps you coordinate your eye movements, which is always great that your eyes are moving together if possible. Okay, then we have the vermis, and the vermis, let's see here, fine motor coordination, okay, leading to smooth flowing movements. Okay, I know I may have asked you this before. How many of you play an instrument? Okay. Does playing an instrument require fine motor coordination? So some people are saying no. Maybe it depends on the instrument you're playing. So I play the cello. It's a string instrument. Would that require fine motor coordination? Because you're moving your fingers all over the place, and it does. Okay. So the vermis would be the portion that would help me learn the fine motor coordination of where my fingers need to move, when they need to move, and how they do it, and all that fun stuff. that over time becomes second nature because you're building those neuronal connections. But also, was there other types of fine motor coordination? What can you think of? Examples? Mm-hmm. Sewing. I'm sorry, what was the other one? Writing. Okay, I see a lot of you writing today. That does require fine motor coordination. Otherwise, you're going to be writing like a kindergartner who has not developed more of a fine motor coordination. Any other examples? Sewing is good because if you're not paying attention, your finger's going to get caught by that needle. I know people who've done that. Let's see. Anything else? Do sports require fine motor coordination? Ooh, typing, I saw you. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you may not, we're not consciously thinking about it because our cerebellum is helping us subconsciously. We're not consciously aware of how it assists us with these things, okay? So remember, the vermis is the portion that helps with those fine motor movements, whatever they are. Then there's a huge variety. Lateral hemispheres, so just like the brain, the cerebrum, the cerebellum has two hemispheres as well, the right and the left hemisphere. And so this is, as it says, the major portion of the cerebellum, and it does work with the cerebrum and helps with planning and practicing and learning complex movements. Okay, so question, how many of you played sports? Lots of hands. Okay. The first time, okay, let's see. What's a good example? Volleyball. The first time you picked up a volleyball and you were asked to serve it across the court, did you do it perfectly? Most people probably didn't. But with practice, you got better with it, right? And so that helps with the practice coordinating those movements. Or let's say, how many of you played football? Yeah, okay. How many of you, think about it. The first time you try to throw a football, did you throw a perfect spiral? Unless you're like an athletic genius, probably not. And so that took practice, building those neuronal connections, especially in the cerebellum, where you're learning those movements. So practicing, playing, planning, and learning those movements so that every time you throw a spiral, you're throwing a good one. Okay? So helping with those more of the coordination. Disorders of the cerebellum, ataxia. You're definitely going to have to know that because I like to talk about disorders. You know that. I figured out how to see the bottom line a little bit better. Okay, so ataxia is going to be damage to the cerebellum. It can be from trauma, so from a head injury, or a stroke. So a stroke would be caused, for example, by a clot that blocks the blood flow to that structure. That's one type of stroke. Another one would be if a blood vessel burst, but it would cause the same problem of loss of blood flow to a region. What it says down here on this bottom line, it says intoxication is an example of ataxia. Intoxication by alcohol. And you are impaired. And fortunately for most people, it's a temporary impairment that wears off when the effects of alcohol wears off. By the way, the reason people get the effect from alcohol is because alcohol can pass through the blood-brain barrier, and it is literally poison to brain cells. And so they're flipping out in the presence of alcohol, and that's why you get those feelings, but you shouldn't feel so happy about it if you think about what those brain cells are going through. Okay, that's my little speech there. So a quick review of anatomy that you guys should be pretty familiar with already, the cerebrum, and we're just looking at exterior surface anatomy. Okay, we know that our brain is divided into right and left hemispheres. And the right and left hemispheres do have different functions. And we'll talk a tiny bit about that. And so just remembering what divides it right down the middle, mid-sagittally, is your longitudinal fissure. Separates your right and left. Do you remember the structure that connects the right and left hemisphere? That big band of white matter. Starts with a C. Corpus callosum. Good. Okay, so we're going to look at a few other divisions on the surface of the brain. Lateral fissure. So the lateral fissure is represented right here, okay, and it is on the side of the brain, so lateral makes sense directionally. The central sulcus, let's do that in a different color. Let's have fun with this. Let's make it, was that hot pink? Okay, central sulcus separates frontal and parietal lobes. Here it is. So I did that in a hot pink. It kind of looks red. We're going to say it's red because I don't like pink. Okay, someday I'm going to give you a questionnaire of Dr. Ut facts. Maybe I should do that for extra credit. I don't know. Okay. It's Friday. I'm just happy it's Friday. Okay, more on the cortex. We know cortex is the outer surface. Medulla is inside. Yeah? Yeah, okay. So just a review of what a gyrus, or a gyri is singular. So if we had more than one, it'd be gyrus or sulcus. Okay, so gyri, or did I confuse that? Anyway, so the fold, so here is a fold. That's a gyrus. Or I guess gyri. No, that's plural. Still gyrus, okay? And then the valleys, the deep valleys, let's make those black. So we're going to do a valley right here. We've got this deep valley where the fold folds inwards. We call that our sulcus. Okay? I call them valleys. They say depression. Same idea. Okay. Remembering the difference between cortex and medulla. You guys got this. And just a reminder of what nuclei means. Nuclei is gray matter within the central nervous system. Okay? What do we call gray matter in the peripheral nervous system? Starts with a G. Ganglion. Yes. You guys are going to totally get those questions right next week. Next Wednesday, remember, next Wednesday we have a handout, crossword, and you have coloring, and we have a quizam, just as a reminder. Wednesday, what's the date on that? The 8th? Yes. Okay. So moving to functions of the cerebrum. Let's find a fun color. Let's try bright blue. Okay. So back to, here's a small picture of the brain, and we need to refer to this because, or if you have the bigger picture to look at, that might help. But so the central sulcus, if you can remember from the previous slide, divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Okay? And that's important because in a little bit we're going to, so actually the central sulcus kind of divides two important ridges or gyruses, or gyri to be correct. So there is one that is in front of the central sulcus, colored in pink. That's our precentral gyrus. And then there is one gyrus behind it, posterior to the central sulcus, and that's our postcentral. So precentral, pre means before, post means after, and that all is talking about, this is the gyrus before the central sulcus, and this right here is the gyrus behind or posterior to that central sulcus. And what those two gyri are involved with is different. One is somatosensory and one is involved with motor functions. Okay, so noticing precentral gyrus, primary motor cortex. Definitely need to know that. So precentral is motor cortex. And then postcentral gyrus is the somatic sensory cortex. So one is involved with senses and one is involved with body motions. Okay. If I back up to the previous, there's got to be a bigger picture. Okay, a bigger picture is coming. Sorry. So definitely need to know this information about the central sulcus. Precentral gyrus, postcentral gyrus, and what is the major function in those two areas. Okay, then lobes, just the general, you know where the lobes are. I'm confident about that. But the basic functions of the lobes is what you're going to need to know. So frontal lobe, bam, in the front. forehead. Voluntary motor function, motivation. So if you're not feeling motivated, maybe your frontal lobe needs a nap. I'm just saying. Motivation, aggression, sense of smell, and mood. You guys have all heard of, I can't remember his first name, Mr. Gage in the 1800s, who had a railroad's metal spike that went through his brain. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. Okay, so what happened? Oh, I wonder if I could go to the internet if it would still record. Let's try it, because this is very relevant. I think it's Thomas Gage. I'll just say, come on, I want to type Gage. So Gage, railroad accident. Okay. Oh yes, his name was, Phineas Gage, like Phineas and Ferb. Okay, so what happened with Sir Phineas Gage? No, he was not truly a Phineas. So forgive me, I'm actually going to just pull up Wikipedia because I do know the basic facts. I don't think they're going to lie on this one. But this man, so notice, let's see here. He was born in 1823 and died in 1860. Looks like he got to avoid the Civil War. And so notice, he's long known as what's called the American Crowbar case. So he was involved in an accident while working on the railroad. And notice he's holding this long metal pole. And so he was involved with helping to drill the holes to put the dynamite in, and then you pack it in with a metal rod. And so when he was doing that, the dynamite exploded, and that rod shot up. And if you look, let's see if I can make this picture bigger. That rod shot up and went through his head. I know this is not super big, but you get the idea. So it looks like it went up underneath the zygomatic process, up all the way through the sphenoid, through the frontal lobe of the brain, and out. This man survived this. Okay? But there's some really interesting facts or things that happened as a result of his injury. First of all, surviving that in the mid-1800s, amazing. You can think about infection alone. But he had a major brain injury, and so here's the picture. That's the actual tamping iron, that's what they called it, that caused his damage. So this is post-accident. You see the droopy eye. You probably can't see out of that. Completely healed. But what was the difference? It was behavioral. Frontal lobe, mood, behavior, motivation. Prior to his accident, he was quite the gentleman. Quite a nice guy, low, even keel, really just chill. Nice guy. After the accident, his behavior changed. He became very aggressive, much less respectful towards women, which, in that day. But the aggression, that type of behavior was not normal Phineas Gage. That was the new Phineas Gage due to the damage that occurred in his frontal lobe. And I'm sure there are other effects as well, but usually I focus on the behavioral effects that it had, because that is a major portion that your frontal lobe is involved with. So if you're interested, look up a little bit more about, can I draw on this? Nope. A little more information about Phineas Gage. It's a pretty fascinating example of what can happen. Oh, no. Is this all being recorded? Okay, here we go. I hope it's still recording. Yay. Okay, parietal lobe. So I'll just write here, Phineas. How do you spell that? We'll just say P. Gage, because I can't spell. He's a great example. So look into that some more if you're curious. Parietal lobe, other side. And so what is this involved with? Okay, it's receiving and evaluating sensory information. So if we can remember, go up to this tiny little brain picture. The post-central gyrus is part of the parietal lobe. Post-central gyrus is involved, is their somatic sensory cortex. So if we go and you look at the parietal lobe, it's telling us receiving and evaluating sensory information. So this lobe of the brain is involved with that. Okay? Sensory information except smell, hearing, and vision. And these are all considered special senses. Okay, then we have our occipital lobe, the back of our head. And this is heavily involved with receiving and interpreting our visual input from our eyes, from our retinas, and sent back through the optic nerves, and some of the information crosses or desiccates to the other side. So our occipital lobe is heavily involved with sight, interpreting, visualizing, actually being able to integrate that and see an image in your head. Then lastly, temporal lobes on the side. By the way, were you guys able to feel the temporal pulse this week? Good, good. Okay, so temporal lobe, this is where, so by the way, here's our temporal lobe. What major sensory organ is close to the temporal lobe? So temporal lobes are here. Our ears, right? They're right there. They're part of the, like right next to the temporal lobe. So it does receive information, it says smell and hearing. So if we were able to look at a brain right now and follow those olfactory tracks, it does go to the temporal lobes if we were able to look at that. So it does receive information from our olfactory tracts and hearing. So for example, from the vestibular cochlear nerves. Also involved with memory and abstract thought. Okay? We're almost done for the day. All right, talking about the middle portion of the cerebrum, so our cerebral medulla. And so within the cerebral medulla, there are nuclei of gray matter, but right now we're looking at what we call, we're looking at white fiber tracts, so axons that are connecting different regions of the brain together, which is really important for the brain to function properly and communicate with each other, and it's important. So we're going to learn about the three major fiber tracts that are most common in the cerebral medulla. So the first is your association fibers. And so let's see. Association fibers are in purple. I'll do it in purple. So our association fibers, so here's an example, They're small. They're connecting regions within the same hemisphere together. So they're kind of connecting fairly local regions together with information. Then the commissural fibers, those are in red, so we're going to go red, not hot pink, red. Okay, commissural fibers, this is what we most commonly know as the corpus callosum, connecting the right and left hemisphere together. Do you know what a lobotomy is? What do they do in a lobotomy? They what? They take off a brain lobe? Let's do this, folks. I love that I can go to the internet. I'd rather let you see it. Okay? Lobotomy. No. Oh, they do lobotomies today, but I believe it's a chemical lobotomy. They don't do the real thing. Okay. Forgive me for going to Wikipedia. You know I'm against Wikipedia. Okay, so lobotomies, do they give us a good picture? Oh, here, I'll go to images. That will give us a good picture to show you what it does. And then we'll talk about the effects. Okay, this is a good picture. Okay, so here, this is an example of lobotomy. So what they do is they take a structure that almost looks like an ice pick. They go in through the inside corner of the eye. So they're going behind the eye. They're not poking your eyeball. And then they go in. And notice the circular motion. They are scrambling the frontal lobe. See how the green area, that's our frontal lobe. And they're scrambling that. So what kind of effect does that have? Some lobotomies also go to separate the right and left hemisphere to sever the corpus callosum. But often it's scrambling the lobe. And so the effect that it can have on people, oh my goodness. There you go, guys. Someone getting a lobotomy. Okay, so the effect there was a famous actress, I can't remember her name now, but, it was like the 20s or the 30s, maybe 20s, but she was quite the fiery individual. And at that time, that was kind of frowned upon. She had serious opinions, and she was like a modern-day woman, but she was in the 20s. And men did not take lightly to it. They thought there was something wrong with her. Often, when they couldn't figure out what was wrong with a woman, they would say she had hysteria. Okay? And of course, Freud had his own theory about how to treat hysteria. But how do you deal with these difficult women or people? How do we chill them out and control them? Give them a lobotomy. They suddenly lose their personality. They become just like living vegetables. They're still conscious, they're still aware, but they're just a completely different person. Easily to handle, easy to control. So their original, what they were, is gone. So lobotomies, yeah, little scary. Thankfully, that is not common today, and if it does happen, it is an extreme last resort. We know so much more about medicine now, thankfully. Okay, last, projection fibers. So those are in our green. And notice, okay, so projection fibers, desiccating in the where? In the brainstem. So they're traveling down and they cross over to the opposite side. See that? Trying to make it nice and obvious. Okay, and so that fits with what we've talked about before with the brainstem and how those information tracks cross over in the brainstem and travel down the opposite side of the spinal cord from which it originated. Okay, so you do need to know these three fiber tracks. What they're connecting, is it within the same hemisphere? Is it connecting hemispheres together? Or is it projecting information from the cerebrum down to the spinal cord or the brainstem? Okay, and it is 10:50, so we'll stop with this today, and I'll get this up online ASAP.